So you got your vibe and you wrote some music. You've recorded your voice, your guitar, your drum machine, your dumb little flute, a tongue drum that you bought from Temu that turns out to be made for squirrels. And now all you need is that finishing touch so your music can sound professional, so you can pay to put it on Spotify and get some plays and get heard. But a good, experienced mastering engineer can be pretty expensive. I've personally charged between $1,500 and $2,500 for albums that I've mastered in the past. And there's a big difference between producing, mixing, and mastering. And all of those things cost money, and some of those things will even want a percentage of your royalties. I have all the leading AI mastering plugins, and I tried a bunch of online AI mastering services, and then I went ahead and hired some big deal award-winning mastering engineers, and I had all of the above take a crack at mastering a mix down of one of my older songs. And then I randomized those masters and had hundreds of people listen to them all and rate them all in a giant double-blind study. So will AI mastering actually do a better job than expensive analog hardware or billboard-topping mastering engineers? I haven't even looked at the results yet, but I'm pretty certain that AI isn't going to accomplish much more in this space than siphoning money out of your pocket that you should have spent on plugins. I hope. Otherwise, this video is going to go to a fucked up place. And that's not all. I'm also going to tell you about my all-time favorite plugins that I've mastered my own and others' music with, and I'm going to give you some tips on how to do this for yourself. And that's not all. I'm going to show you how to run the same software that most of the AI mastering services are running, but you'll be able to run it more efficiently and effectively for free. And that's about it.
To the floor, to the couch, might wake the neighbors up, break you in and break you.
Okay, so simply put, a producer puts all the instruments and sounds together. Let's say you wrote a song on your piano and you wrote some lyrics over it. A producer would pick out the right microphones to mic the piano with in a recording, and a traditional producer would probably add a little bit to the sonic theme, maybe add in a bass or a drum track or backup singers. A producer is ideally an experienced collaborator. And how much does that cost? It depends. If you're an attractive woman, you've probably already had quite a few guys offer to produce your album for free. You don't even have to be a musician, but professionally, this range is all over the place. Traditionally, an experienced producer that is actually going to make your album sound better and not just waste your time is going to want upfront fees and points, or percentage of sales. For example, I've been extremely picky about who I've worked with, and I've charged into 5 figures to produce an album, but that includes recording in my facility, hiring session musicians, and mixing and mastering. Now, the title producer in hip-hop is a little bit more of an ambiguous term. For example, when Jay Dilla produced Busta Rhymes, he was essentially just sending him beats that Busta Rhymes would later buy and license. If your producer has experience in engineering, sometimes your producer will be your mixing engineer. Sometimes you will hire a separate mixing engineer, but a mixing engineer is the person putting compression on the drums, equalizing the sharp S sound out of your vocals, ducking the bass channel from the kick drum channel. If you don't know what that means, stay tuned, and basically just setting the volumes and panning for everything to be ideal before it gets mastered. And finally, a mastering engineer takes all of those individual stems or tracks, or sometimes just a few, or sometimes only the mixdown itself, and gives it that final oomph. And that oomph is actually really important. As much as the musical purist in me hates to admit it, a bad master can easily ruin an otherwise great song. And that's because it's a much overlooked creative process that's always been a very necessary part of recorded music. Now, back in the olden days, could we get a vibraphone playing a whole tone scale going up? Thanks. Now, back in the olden days, a mastering engineer was called a transfer engineer because their job was to transfer the audio from tape to vinyl. This was actually a bit trickier than it sounded, as the engineer would not only have to maintain quality, but do so in a way that reduced damage to the grooves in the vinyl during playback. A formula for this, called the RIA curve, or Recording Industry of America curve, would eventually get standardized by major labels in the late 1950s, and it calculated the levels of pre-emphasis in recording and de-emphasis on source playback. And then engineers started using creative filtering, equalization, tape compression to keep things sounding better and better, and eventually, mastering engineer became its own art form. With the introduction of CDs and digital media, mastering engineers were no longer having anything to do with the transfer, at least in the way that they used to, and had to find new ways to pull off techniques that they used to achieve by playing with the physical limitations of tape and vinyl, such as tape compression and tape saturation. And then things got competitive. Not between engineers so much, but every record label wanted the new song they were promoting to be the loudest thing on the jukebox or radio, and by the late 1990s, the art of mastering became more of a sabotage to the mixing engineer than a compliment to them. The problem with prioritizing loudness above all other things is that you lose fidelity in the detail of the process as the peaks and valleys of the waveform get smashed. The term is actually called brick walling because the waveform is getting smashed against the highest threshold, like a car being smashed into a brick wall. This competition is known as the Loudness Wars, which claims casualties of thousands of albums from the world's most listened to musicians and bands. Some people didn't seem to mind it as much as others. I've always personally been blown away by the stupidity of the whole thing. So I'll give you an example. One of the biggest offenders, in my opinion, is Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication album, one that I have personally disliked when it first came out, and I think the reason for that is because it's mastered in a way that sabotages any and every subtlety that made me like the band in the first place. Let's take a look at a recognizable song that's well mastered, and while it prioritizes loudness, it's not the first priority, and that would be Daft Punk's Give Life Back to Music. It is loud, it's spacious, it's full, and the only details lost in compression are tiny peaks of the kick drum that you wouldn't even notice. So how do you do this with your music? I'm assuming that a lot of y'all clicked on this link to find out how legitimate, superior, or inferior AI mastering is, as nearly everybody remotely involved with music making has been bombarded with advertisements for the last couple of years. As a co-founder of an AI rights management company, I say this with confidence. Conservatively, at least 90% of the time that you see the words AI in anything related to music production, what you're actually seeing is a subscription service that's charging you for repurposed open source software without attribution. The reason I'm telling you this is because this is actually good news for you if you clicked on this video looking for an AI mastering solution. I'm not going to call out every online AI mastering service by name and tell you not to waste your money on them, but I can tell you that I believe that they are just putting a shiny faceplate on an open source repository called Mastering 2.0. Mastering is incredibly easy to use. It just asks you to upload your music that you want mastered, and then upload a song as an example of the mastering style that you would like. And that's it. If you are even remotely familiar with compiling and running a Python program, this will be a piece of cake. If you're not, you can just run it in a Docker with hardly any performance impact. While I'm using Chrome here, there is no internet required as it's accessing files on my computer. What's even cooler, way cooler, is that as of a few months ago, you could run it in Comfy UI, which is a node-based interface for AI image generators like Stable Diffusion. If you set that up, you will get a lot of options to choose from and even route your own algorithms without ever having to write a line of code. It all runs locally on your Windows, Mac, or Linux machine and is entirely free of charge. And you can generate and save as many versions as you want without ever having to pay a dime to anyone. Now don't get me wrong, paid services like Lander and Kits and Moises are not just having you pay to use mastering, they are giving you different mastering styles or profiles that are presumably AI models of different genres that will give you a couple options to try. But let's be honest here, you're supposed to be an artist. Choosing your own examples to make models in mastering or playing with Comfy UI is so much more customizable and fun than just a few options that everybody else is choosing from. I've been offered a hefty chunk of money to show you some upcoming AI music engineering and mastering tools that are named after and endorsed by award-winning music engineers. That means that pretty soon on your YouTube feed here, you're going to be seeing thumbnails with faces like this, with titles claiming things like "this will put all music engineers out of business," and using words like game changer and epic. So to my knowledge, there's a few of these services coming out soon, and you won't be able to buy them. You'll have to subscribe or buy credits every single time you want to use them. And the idea is that you'll be able to type in phrases describing what you want out of your master, and then, like magic, the artificial intelligence will allegedly make it happen. There's actually nothing really clever or innovative happening here. Functionally, this is just an LLM like ChatGPT that's licensed and then plugged into a bunch of keywords that will then pick models to run through an inference algorithm like Mastering 2.0. And to me, realistically using that to master music is kind of like putting on a pair of fucking boxing gloves to build a Lego sculpture. Me, I am a bit more of a visionary. I'm imagining a world where these tools exist where instead of buying credits to try and describe in English words the sound that you want, you could just, I don't know. I mean, this is crazy, but hear me out. Turn knobs and faders and instantly hear in real time all of those differences and just sort of shape in the sound that you want. And when you hear it, you'll know it. This is crazy talk. If the reason you're drawn to these AI mastering services is because you're an audio engineering noob and you don't have any confidence, here's what I recommend. Believing in yourself just a little bit and not taking shit so seriously. And remember, this is art. There is no such thing as a perfect master. It's even hard to say if there is a right or a wrong master. After all, we just talked about the loudness war, where the world's leading mastering engineers spent 10 years destroying nearly every album that came into their studio. I promise you, it is not rocket science and it is not all that complicated. And fortunately, you now have a compromise of AI-assisted plugins, which kind of help get you started. So might I suggest taking whatever money you are going to spend on credits or a subscription to an AI mastering website and instead spend it on a one-and-done mastering plugin. The most popular of the bunch is Isotope, or now Native Instruments Ozone, which will set you back about $50 for Elements and $200 for Standard at full price. And they do have some pretty steep sales once or twice a year, but Ozone Standard has literally everything you need to learn the ins and outs of mastering a song, and what's even more useful, it has an AI mastering function where it basically listens to your song and gives you suggested settings. And those settings shouldn't be taken as the de facto master of your song, but more so just a starting point or a sort of presentation of what could be done, as all the modules are right there for you to play with and tweak. Another tool that is an absolute secret weapon of mine for quick masters, like if I'm just writing a background track for this channel or for a demo, is Newfangled Audio's Invigorate. It's brilliant in the most extraordinarily simple and realistically intuitive way. You just slide this little dot between 0 decibel boost and 36 decibel boost, and then in the other plane between compression, limiting, and overdrive. It also has side chaining, gain compensation, gating, and all the other powerful stuff, but the UI is easy enough for anybody to use. Invigorate retails for $100, and it also goes on sale from time to time. It's not marketed as AI assisted, but you could dial in a decent sound without knowing a thing about mastering. Everybody's different, it's very subjective, but personally, if I'm using more than 2 or 3 plugins or devices in my main output channel when I'm mastering something, I'll just go back to the engineering stage. I very, very rarely put a subtractive EQ plugin on my overall mix. I would much rather build a mastering chain in session and then EQ the tracks to fine-tune it. For anybody curious, my most frequently used plugins in that small chain, not in any particular order, are Newfangled Elevate. This is a mastering plugin that uses advanced spectral limiting for the purpose of increasing wideness and loudness while preserving transparency in your mixdown. It's probably the first and only plugin that successfully uses some psychoacoustic magic tricks with transients rather than just offering a bunch of ways to brickwall a mix. I would say that I personally think that it's the most innovative and powerful mastering plugin on the market, but I also don't think it's going to be super useful to you if you've never mastered anything before unless you spent some time learning and practicing. Native Instruments Ozone Imager. Imager is an Ozone module that can also be ran as a standalone plugin, which standalone plugin is kind of an oxymoron now that I'm saying it out loud, but what it accomplishes is pretty cool. You can let it automatically divide up your EQ into a number of different ranges, then increase or decrease the stereo profile within those ranges, and you could even give your mix slight latency and phase changes. This is not so much something where you can really predict the settings, it just needs to be played with until it works, and sometimes it doesn't work at all. But out of all the stereo widening plugins out there, this is the one that I actually get good results from consistently that couldn't be achieved by just panning tracks. PSP Vintage Warmer. The irony about Vintage Warmer is that it's 24 years old, essentially a vintage plugin. And in my opinion, it is easily the best digital single or multiband analog compression emulation out there. And I'm not alone in thinking this. The algorithm put PSP on the map as one of the most recognizable audio plugin companies and one that you should be familiar with if you're doing any type of audio engineering. They also make Infinistrip, which is a great 500 series plugin, and if Newfangled Elevate was a bit over your head, PSP's Flare uses a somewhat similar type of psychoacoustic compression that trades DSP overhead for ease of use. Believe it or not, I'm not a huge hardware mastering guy. I don't even own one 500 series module, and I truly do not think that hardware is objectively superior to software or vice versa. If you learned to master using hardware, you'll probably prefer it. If you've been getting satisfactory results with VSTs, then you'll probably see hardware preamps and compressors as an overcomplicated signal chain and waste of money. But it should be pointed out that most full-time professional mastering engineers use both hardware and software. Here's something I've been excited about, and while I haven't had a chance to use it for anything other than some quick tests as I've just had the prototype, the Polyend Press is a brand new stereo compressor that just came out last week.
I'm close friends with Polyend. No conflict, that bitch is just love.
This is why I'm excited about it. The amp is feed forward and not feedback. This takes a lot of trial and error and component switching in the circuit design to pull off, otherwise it'll sound noisy at lower volumes, which is why you rarely see feed forward circuits in things like pedals or affordable compressors. But so far, it's incredibly snappy, and I can push a mix or instrument really far before it distorts. And that results in being able to adjust the ratio and threshold and pull out sounds and artifacts that otherwise would go unappreciated. My go-to piece of mastering hardware is the old Focusrite Platinum Compounder, which unfortunately hasn't been made in about 20 years. The Compounder is a diamond in the rough for me for two reasons. It's a really comprehensive box, possibly too comprehensive for some people, and that usually results in too much noise or distortion. But the limiter and expander sections of the circuit use photoresistor circuits, so there's close to no popping when you push the gain open. By the way, if all these things I'm saying sound like complete nonsense, that's fine. What it basically means is that it's a clever design that delivers sound quality reserved for much more expensive rack units. The Compounder also has a really unique bass expansion circuit, and it really sounds amazing on things like overdriven guitars and digital drum machines. And it also has stereo side chaining, which is, well, let's talk about that. By the way, in this video, I'm not at all saying that you shouldn't hire a mastering engineer. A second set of ears for the final mix is actually a great thing that the vast majority of professional musicians use. And if you do hire a mastering engineer, even for a second opinion, one really good reason to learn how to engineer and master your own music is because you'll be able to create music with the sonic shape of the final mix in mind. A great example of this is learning how to properly use ducking and side chaining. The most commonly used technique is the kick drum channel side chaining the bass channel. In rock or jazz music, this can make your mix much louder by precisely lowering the volume of the bass channel in the brief moment when a kick is being heard. Most people can't even tell that it's happening. They just hear a good mix. On the other hand, genres like EDM and hip-hop have used sidechaining more creatively and oftentimes exaggerate it as a function of style more so than utility. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. You can almost master a song simply by setting up the right ducking or sidechaining algorithm. A few years ago, I made a video showing you how this is possible in FL Studio using nothing more than peak detectors controlling channel volumes. You can also set up mixing buses to have certain channels shape specific frequencies in other channels. Obviously, we're not going to get too deep in the weeds of that for this video, but you should definitely throw a mastering plugin like Invigorate or Vintage Warmer in your main output channel so you could better optimize your mixing decisions to fit the final version of the song. And if you can't afford one of those plugins right now, that's fine. I actually can't think of a DAW that doesn't come with a compressor or limiter that would assist with this.
Tonight, the world gets to find out who reigns supreme. Will it be a product of machine learning and artificial intelligence beating human mastering engineers at their own game? Or will it fail to live up to the hype and crumble at the feet of some long-time human champions, Ed the Sound Man and Max Hosinger? No matter what happens, someone is going to be butthurt that Ben made this video.
That's right, and the rules tonight will have an enormous impact on the industry. Ben set up a double-blind test using the original unmastered mixdown of a song released in 2017 named Starlight. It was chosen because it's quite sonically dynamic and shifts genres quite a bit, so an AI algorithm wouldn't be able to easily detect rock or EDM and then place a mixing preset on it. He then created or paid for about a dozen different options everywhere from award-winning Billboard-topping mastering engineers to AI assistant plugins to analog gear. And then he culled all of that down to the 7 best mixes, the elite, the finalists. Then Ben had nearly 500 people listen to all 7 options, which were unlabeled and randomly ordered each time the survey loaded, and every single one of those people rated each of them from 1 to 10. Wow!
So, first of all, asking hundreds of people to listen to the same song 12 times is a tad bit much. So here are the 5 that, in my professional opinion, did not qualify for the survey due to either delivering a really bad mix or some sort of problem in the portion of the mix that would almost certainly get low votes. Lander, BandLab, Waves Online Mastering, Slate Digital's Virtue, and DistroKid's Mixia. In this case, all of those sorry. So on to the survey. The top 7 coming in last place was Native Instruments Ozone's Mastering Assistant, just the output of what it decided to do to my song. I actually did quite a bit of trial and error and tried different versions of this with different parts of the song, and I chose the best one, and yeah. And to be fair, Ozone's Mastering Assistant is not supposed to be a one-click solution, but rather a custom-tailored preset to start with, and it definitely has worked out better for me in the past with songs that were less dynamic. Coming in 6th place is Kits.ai, which I assume is using a tweaked version of the open source Mastering 2.0 software described earlier in this video. 5th place was a bit of a wild card. I mastered the song using nothing but my Platinum Compounder rack unit. I have never only used the compounder, nor would in any professional setting, so I was kind of surprised to see that it didn't come in last. 4th place was me using Native Instruments Ozone and Neutron as intended. I carefully sought out the overall suggestions, then Neutron did its thing by analyzing each and every channel and making some changes in volume and panning. Ultimately, I think I spent a lot more time setting that up and arranging it and tweaking the result than I would have spent just using track EQs on my normal mastering chain. Now here's where things get interesting. This really surprised me. 3rd place was the totally free and open source Mastering 2.0. I ran it locally on my machine and simply used Daft Punk's Give Life Back to Music as my reference song, as it's an excellent master that covers distorted guitars, 4/4 beats, just like my song. It should be pointed out that this wasn't exactly magic. Finding a song with the right elements and sonic profile was actually pretty tricky, potentially taking as much time and thought as just mastering the song myself would have taken. Coming in 2nd place was the infamous and mysterious mastering engineer, Ed the Soundman. But what I got was sort of a neutered version of Ed because I wanted this video to come out before November, and Ed typically spends weeks mastering an album so he can make more objective technical decisions and reduce ear fatigue and bias. I talked Ed into just trusting his initial gut feeling and hurrying through things, and he scored 2nd place, just a few votes behind Max Hosinger, who is a mastering engineer for hundreds of clients, but in that client list is Bastille, the 1975, and Years, which is a perfect combination of references to cover all of the stylistic places that my song Starlight hits. Max uses a combination of high-end analog rack compressors, 500 series modules, and plugins, and apparently that's the move because Max took first in my little survey here. Hey, you, congratulations. This video probably has a ridiculously long runtime at this point, but we made it pretty much almost to the end. I hope somebody learned something, and if not, that sucks. I'd like to thank both Ed and Max for participating in this test because it would actually be a pretty bad look for them if an AI mastering website beat them. By the way, full disclosure, this is a pretty incestuous industry, and while I do have personal relationships with some of the software and hardware companies mentioned in this video, they are not paid endorsements or favors of any kind. There are no sponsors for this video other than my Patreon members, and being able to get through almost an entire year without any sponsors is making me feel, I don't know, optimistic. The Patreon itself has field recordings, audio assets, sometimes we have exclusive coupons, released music, unreleased music, but best of all, on the Discord server we have a monthly songwriting challenge called Sim Selections that has a growing number of users, and they're all sounding better and better each month. It's been going on for years. You should totally join us. To do so, it costs as little as $1. Thanks for watching. Keep creating. Bye.